Awesome.
All right, we're live. This is the No Delusion Zone. I'm David Debato, and it is Tuesday, April 28th, 2026, and I'm really glad to have our special guest today, Ken Harbaugh. He's got such a long list of credits. In fact, he is exactly who I want to be when I grow up. Really, he's done a lot, and I'm serious. I'm not going to list them all. Ken Harbaugh is a veteran. He is a former U.S. Navy aviator, combat veteran, and he has done a lot since he's left the military. And we're going to talk about some of them today. He has his own, and let me put this up here, podcast on the Midas Network, which is this right here. I encourage folks to take a look at that. And this is actually his smiling face. This is the man himself in his aviator jacket. And seriously, I may joke a lot.
That's from the B side. That is a deep track. I don't know where you found that, but
well, I have my sources. Yeah. So, but I do want folks to, if you already don't, to check out Ken on his podcast. He's often on the Midas Network. He also is on The Warning with Steve Schmidt. So without further adu, Ken, welcome to the No Delusion Zone.
David, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I was serious. I mean, you are a man after my own heart. I told you that before. You say a lot of the things that I say all the time, although less eloquently on my part. And I tend to use, unfortunately, some rather graphic terms. But you do speak to me and millions of other Americans who are just disgusted. As I said, you're a former Navy aviator, and you've done a lot since leaving the military. And the first question I want to ask you is, I think, a question you don't get asked enough, which is why, after you left the military, you could have done many things. You could have been gone to a defense contractor. You could have done full-time work as a college professor. You could have done a lot of different things. Why did you choose to be a spokesperson, a pundit, an activist, if you will, speaking out against MAGA, essentially, and against the current administration? Why go down that path?
Well, great question. I was incidentally, very briefly, a defense contractor, and I briefly was a college professor as well. So I tried both of those.
That's all right.
And, I think my epiphany came. I mean, I got out of the Navy with every intention to do anything but like that kind of thing. I made a clean break, but I had a couple epiphanous moments. The first was signing my DD 214. And I don't know if folks know what that is, but that's the piece of paper that ends your military service. You carry it around with you for the rest of your life. It's what gets you your VA benefits, your, free national parks pass, all that stuff. But I think it's block 24, the signature block. And I remember being at the Bureau of Personnel station north of Charleston, which was my last duty assignment, and looking down at this empty signature block, realizing, hey, once I sign this, it's over. Like, my identity for the last 9 years is behind me. I will no longer be a Navy pilot. And that's a pretty defining identity for anyone who's been close to naval aviation. I mean, it's all consuming. And I realized that's over. I'm going to have to find something else to be, not just something else to do, but something else to be. And I went off to law school, thinking that I would pursue a totally civilian path and leave military service behind, leave that veteran identity behind. But it was the middle of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I know it's going to sound weird to folks who haven't served, but getting out in the middle of a war is a tough thing to do. You have this sense of, I don't know if it's survivor's guilt or what, but you're leaving a lot of people behind, and better people than I stayed. And I remember this one moment in particular, sitting at a coffee shop across the corner from Yale Law School, which is its own kind of bubble. And a couple half-ton Army trucks rolled by, probably from the armory north of town. And some kid sitting at a table nearby, through no fault of his own, just trying to be funny, said, "What, is there a war going on?" And this was probably 2006. I mean, there were 2 wars going on, and something in me snapped, and I remember standing up from my table, knocking over my drink. I wanted to give this kid a piece of my mind and realize it's not his fault. We have created these silos. We have insulated the military, from the society it exists to defend. And I found myself very shortly after that, a few days after that, driving down to Bethesda Naval Hospital to meet with some of the Marines who were recovering there from their injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that's what set me on this path. There was one conversation in particular talking to a Marine, very young Marine, about to be wheeled into his 10th reconstructive surgery. And he looked me in the eye and said, "Sir, I lost my legs, but that's it. I didn't lose my desire to serve or my pride in being an American." And I'm sure that had something to do with my decision to spend the next many years dedicated to veterans.
And that was it. That was your epiphany, and that set you on the track to the to be the. No, I mean, you are an activist. Obviously, you've done, and I didn't read it all. I mean, you were a Democratic nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in Ohio. You've done a lot of writing for the Atlantic, the Bulwark, the New York Times, and others. And as I mentioned briefly, you did an award-winning film called and I just mentioned it here, Against All Enemies. Let's launch right into that, because unfortunately, I
Yeah.
know you do have a hard stop coming up that you've got to go. Briefly, what is the Against All Enemies film about? Because I do want folks to watch it.
Yeah, well, I think I failed to answer the heart of your question, which was how I got onto the pro democracy bent. I mean, that was something I felt compelled to do in the aftermath of Donald Trump's first election, and we can get into that if you want. But Against All Enemies came out of the January 6th insurrection, and sitting in my driveway as it was happening, listening to the radio, I actually texted my wife. I said, come down here. This is a moment that is going to reshape America for the I don't know what exactly I said, but it felt like a 9/11 moment. One of those things that is going to define us as a country, that history books are going to be writing about 100 years from now. And when I realized over the next few days how many veterans had been involved in that, when I saw those tactical stacks working their way through the crowd to help breach the Capitol, and I realized, wow, something is deeply, deeply wrong in veteran culture, that so many of us are drawn to that thing. And I understand it now. There is this deep longing for mission and community and a sense of purpose. And I spent years trying to create channels for that through the Mission Continues and Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon is something I'm still incredibly proud of. It's retrained over 100,000 veterans to be disaster responders. That's how that desire to continue serving and to be part of something bigger than yourself after leaving the military, that's what that should look like. It shouldn't be the 3%ers or the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys, but they offer something that is missing for too many veterans leaving the service, which is that sense of community and camaraderie, and also the lie that the oath of office obliges you to do something like this, and that's ultimately what I came to in the course of making this movie, Against All Enemies, with my co-producer Sebastian Younger. People who've served in the military probably know his name from Restrepo and Korengal. He also wrote Tribe, the defining work about military camaraderie. And look, I think the folks who breached the doors and who assaulted cops and who threatened to hang Mike Pence should be held accountable. But I think a lot of folks have escaped accountability. And those are the ones who provoked this and then ran like cowards when what they had unleashed came for them. I'm talking about Josh Hawley running through the halls of Congress for his life. I'm talking about tough guy Mark Wayne Mullen, now the head of DHS, cowering behind the real heroes of that day, who he has refused to honor ever since. And you see that photo of Mark Wayne Mullen guarding empty benches in the House chamber. I think we have a lot of work to do to understand where the fault really lays in our society for undermining democracy in such a fundamental way. And the foot soldiers deserve some of the blame, but not all of the blame, not even most of the blame.
Well, and I agree, of course, with everything that you say. It just really still really bothers me that any member of the military, from the first day enlistee up to generals, apparently don't get the oath.
Yeah.
The words just don't sink in, because it's still it angers me. I'll be honest, it angers me a lot that they could swear their oath of allegiance to the Constitution, and, as you know, have that reinforced in training throughout their entire military career, and then take part in the insurrection on January 6th, or at the very least to cheer it on. I understand the seductive nature of militias. I mean, you have to be stupid if you don't. For military members, it offers the camaraderie, the sense of belonging, tribal. It's got weapons. It's got training and formation. You get to shoot and blow things up. I mean, those are fun things for most members of the military. However, the disconnect between the taking the oath to swear to something bigger than yourself and to protect the democracy, to protect the very building that they stormed, I still get really pissed off. And I'm sorry, you're a better man than me. I don't forgive them. I probably never will. Although I will say we do have to bridge that gap. If we ever hope to retake our democracy, we have to bridge the gap between those that don't quite understand what happened on January 6th, or we're on the periphery, we're not really involved, but did cheer those folks on. We have to get through to that. And I will blame the Democrats for that. Their message is horrible. They don't usually have one. They allow the Republicans to control social media, to control the message. I've said many, many times, they're cowards, the Democrats. I won't get into that because, again, you don't have enough time to listen to all my rants. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the correspondence dinner.
Yeah.
I know you. In fact, I was just listening to your podcast about that, as well as some other interviews. There's so many conspiracy theories going on and on about that. I voiced my opinion on that. I will just say this before you answer. At the very least, whether or not this was what people say it was, staged or not, the security or lack thereof was a disgrace, a continuing disgrace of the Secret Service. The fact that this individual, if he is in fact the only individual, a real shooter, stayed at the hotel. He was in the Hilton, and he was able to smuggle in this disassembled rifle. There was no checking of him. And if you could, Ken, I know you've got some time. I just want to play a brief clip of somebody talking about this, please. Another analyst, because it'll kind of frame what we're talking about. So just hold on, and then I'd like your comments right after this.
I was perplexed even before the incident about what I saw in security. Matt Gutman just pointed out that nobody was checking IDs. My ID was not checked at any point in the evening. To get into the hotel, all I had to do was show a screenshot of an invitation.
And that crossed your mind initially?
Absolutely.
Before even walking into the ballroom?
I'll tell you what else I thought. Inside the room, security was not particularly close to the principals, visibly. So the Secret Service agents who were visible were not very close to the president. There were more people behind that curtain. But as we saw, it took them time to react. Once the incident happened, it was a full 2 minutes or so before anyone came to get the Secretary of War.
What did Pete Hexas do in that moment?
He was alert. He was assessing what was going on in the room. He was taking care of his wife. I think that was his first priority. Dana White, the head of the UFC, who was also...
I don't want to play the rest of it because he talks about some stuff that's irrelevant. But what he said there, a few things, the fact that they didn't even check IDs of people going in is unbelievable. The fact that the shooter got so close to the president, and as was mentioned there, he was half serious. He had a shotgun for one thing, and he was just, he charged the line. If it had been 2, 3, 4, 5 different serious individuals, people that really wanted to do some damage, I question whether or not they could have actually pulled off an assassination. It was a disgrace from start to finish. The lack of security at the hotel, and this individual getting as far as he did. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's embarrassing for the country, and I think it needs to be said, and I never miss an opportunity to say it, that we have to condemn violence in all political violence in all its forms. A disagreement on policy cannot rise to the level where we resort to violence. And you have heard that from, uniformly from Democratic leadership. You've heard that from the top down, from Barack Obama to Hakeem Jeffries to Chuck Schumer. Democrats are condemning acts of political violence. My fear is that this incident will be used, as others have, as an excuse to crack down on political speech, which is very different than political violence. I think we already see assaults underway on the First Amendment. Pete Hegseth is at the center of many of those assaults. His banishing of the Pentagon press corps during a war which the American people should be informed about has been deemed illegal, and he has defied judges' orders. I mean, you saw in the wake of Charlie Kirk's horrific assassination a similar crackdown on freedom of speech, a purging of people in the military who had political and policy disagreements with Charlie Kirk. They were fired for their expressions of free speech.
And the Democrats condemned that also at the time.
And the Democrats, as did I.
Yes.
I disagree with Charlie Kirk on just about everything, but we do not resort to those kinds of acts in spite of our disagreements. The contrast with Republican leadership could not be more stark, where you had, from the beginning days of his campaign, Donald Trump encouraging the Second Amendment crowd, direct quote, to take care of the Hillary Clinton problem, mocking the brutal attack by a hammer-wielding assailant on Nancy Pelosi's husband, mocking the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband in Minnesota. At the same time, lowering flags to half-mast for Charlie Kirk while not even mentioning an elected representative's name who was murdered by a MAGA assailant. The contrast is clear. I hope Americans see it, because the rot starts at the top. When you have a commander-in-chief, when you have a president who is violent by nature, and I've talked to family members of Donald Trump about this. It is something in his soul. He is a violent person, and it has infected the Republican Party. Democrats draw a sharp contrast with their condemnation of violence every time it happens.
Ken, why are so many, and I'm talking tens of millions of Americans, drawn to the cruelty? Forget politics, forget agendas, because I don't think Trump has an agenda except himself. Why are so many tens of millions of Americans drawn to the cruelty, the obscenities, the crass, crude behavior exhibited by not only Donald Trump, but all his MAGA followers, his cult?
Yeah.
What is it about that attracts them?
So I think in peacetime, it's entertaining. It's the Coliseum. It's the spectacle of gladiatorial combat. I mean, this is not a new feature of human nature. People like to be entertained. There's that timeless Russell Crowe quote from Gladiator, "Are you not entertained?" I think Donald Trump is the consummate entertainer. That's why he was elected. That was his decades-long audition for the job, was entertaining a certain segment of the American people. And he never had the majority of the American people. He was legitimately elected. I'm not buying into that conspiracy theory, but when you look at the number of people who voted and then the percentage of them who voted for Trump, the majority of Americans don't actually fall for that kind of performative ridiculousness, but enough did to get him elected president. I caveated that answer by saying in peacetime, because when things get real, when things get serious, I think Americans become serious too. And it takes far too long, and it is frustrating how much pain we have to go through to have these moments of awakening. But now that we're in a shooting war, now that Trump's policies are actually biting, now that people actually see what happens when you unleash a secret police force and try to create a police state onto the streets of America's cities, Americans are rejecting it. It was fun while it lasted. I'll put that in air quotes. But farmers are going bankrupt. They have the highest suicide rate among any profession in the U.S. Blue-collar workers who shifted towards Trump in waves are realizing that the tariffs are devastating. the military is starting to realize, hey, maybe we need a commander in chief who actually thinks before he shoots. And you see in the poll numbers a president who is at record lows. I mean, since polls have been taken, no president has been more unpopular than Donald Trump is right now. And it's because I think Americans are finally waking up to the fact. This does not mean the danger is over. If anything, it is heightened because Donald Trump is going to act like a caged animal between now and the midterms. You see that in the attempts um, to uh, uh, to shift electoral outcomes. The first attempt in Texas, which did not go through a democratic process. The people of Texas did not vote on that. You see the threat of deploying ICE to polling places in key states in those black and brown neighborhoods to intimidate people from voting. I think the fact that he is so deeply unpopular does not guarantee us the kind of check on his authority that would normally follow in normal times. He will stop at nothing to avoid accountability.
You know, I know what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. But again, since I'm not as nice a man as you, I can't forgive the tens of millions who voted for him and continue to support him regardless of what's happened. But I agree that we need to reach out to the ones that are on the fence. Otherwise, we're never going to take our democracy back again, our constitutional republic. But boy, can it really open my eyes to how many Americans can be so easily deceived. You know,
Yeah.
people that probably never read the Constitution and never will, never read American history and never will. I just did a podcast about the fact that 54% of American adults read at or below a sixth grade level. So it's
Yeah, I read
really
that
hard
too.
for
Yeah.
those people, you know, to understand anything besides, you know, the back of a Campbell's soup can. So, you know, it makes it really, really difficult. It's one of these moments, you know, like, wow, you know, really, what's going on here? And we shouldn't wonder why Iran is doing Lego memes, you know, to get to the MAGA people here, because really that's all they understand. You know, the cartoon with the bubble above their head and a little bit of words. That's what, you know, 54% of Americans understand. Talking about this, and I have to throw this in. For those of you who feel the way that Ken and I do about Donald Trump specifically and want to have something to remind them every single morning, here you go. You should buy this branded merchandise from the No Delusion Zone, because this will set your morning right, and you can fill it up with a little bit of this while you're doing it, and you'll remember about being an American and why you're so pissed off that day and how we need to take the country back again. You mentioned, again, as a former military member, as I am, and you just did a podcast about this, I think, or at least you mentioned it. Not forget Donald Trump, whether or not he's going to ever use nuclear weapons, God forbid. But the other question that comes up all the time that I ask myself, Ken, is what or who will, what senior American military officials will actually finally stand up to the illegal orders of Donald Trump? And I don't just mean nuclear weapons. That should be a given. But I mean, we're still blasting people out of the ocean that haven't had a trial or an indictment or even an investigation, so-called drug runners. And that's being carried out by the U.S. military. When are senior military members on active duty going to say, sorry, sir, I cannot follow that illegal order? When's that going to happen, and is it?
Well, some already have. If you recall, there was a real conflict between Secretary Hegseth and the former SOCOM commander, and he resigned. Now, I think we are fast reaching the point, and for most of, if not all of America's military history, that's been the path. If you object to an illegal order, you resign and protest, your career's over. You got a hard time. I mean, it's a big sacrifice, right? Tough time getting that prime consulting job or whatever those retired GFOs are supposed to go get, but you still do it out of principle. I think we're at the point now, and I participate in plenty of tabletop exercises. We're supposed to call them that instead of war games these days, but they game out these kinds of scenarios. What happens if, for example, Trump threatens to invoke the Insurrection Act or try to do what he did in the first term and deploy the 82nd Airborne onto the streets of America's cities. And I think the answer for today's GFOs, general and flag officers, is not to resign and protest, but get fired. Make it hard. Make them issue the press release saying this general is being dismissed for cause. Make it a scandal. I am past the point where I think that graceful, quiet resignation and protest is the way to alert the American people to the danger. And look, this is not casting any aspersions at all on the admiral who resigned from SOCOM in protest, apparently, of these strikes. That was actually a pretty brave thing to do. But going forward, I would like to see a person in that position demand to be fired, dismiss me. I'm not going to follow this illegal order. Fire me. There are retired GFOs who have spoken out. That interview by Stan McChrystal with David French in the Times was, it should have gotten way more play than it did. I mean, he comes right out and calls Pete Hegseth a failed major. I have heard GFOs privately, actually active duty GFOs privately, refer to the secretary as the major. And that is a level of insubordination. It doesn't sound insubordinate, but for anybody in uniform, you know it is. For active duty generals to call their secretary of defense the major, that's a signal. Never heard anything like that before. I think there is a calculation going on in each of their heads right now, which is, if I leave, who's going to fill my role? And is it going to be someone who can stop the really bad orders, like the order to drop a nuke or the order to put boots on Karg Island with absolutely no overhead protection from the waves of Iranian drones that would slaughter those Marines? I mean, you finally saw Mattis speak out, and I think that was part of his motivation, the suggestion that we would send Marines through the gauntlet of the strait and onto Karg Island. Some are speaking out, but the short answer to your question is not enough.
I agree. And I have spoken and written about this many, many times, that I am also tired of the silence. Silence is good. The crickets, that they don't say anything. But I'm really tired of active duty flag officers not taking a stand. We're at an inflection point, Ken. You know this better than most. A tipping point where this country is going to go one way or the other much faster than I would like it to. I don't know when that's going to happen, but people that are in that position, senior level military flag officers, need to take a stand, and taking a stand silently at this point in our history is not going to make it. So yeah, it takes a lot of courage. I get that. But, it's a matter of, do you really believe in your oath? Do you really believe in this democracy, in this republic, or not? Because we're at that point. And I know you've got to go, so we're kind of up against the clock here. I also have to talk about Iran, the debacle that is Iran. Where is this going to go? I mean, everybody's in this business has spoken and written a lot about it. This was a war that was not necessary. Of course, MAGA is all over it. It's the best thing since sliced bread. America's come out better for it. Our economy is better. Our military has shined, and all that BS. Where are we at in Iran right now from your military perspective, and where are we going to be in the next few weeks? What do you think is going to happen out of the delusional minds of Hegseth and Trump?
Well, who knows? I mean, we had options a few weeks ago. We had all of the options before we kicked off this war of choice, and with every passing day, those off ramps are diminishing. I think we're going to wind up in a situation where Iran comes out the winner, not just geopolitically, not just strategically, but even economically. I think it's entirely possible that they will be able to erect a toll booth over the Strait of Hormuz and extract $1 million plus toll on all of the ships going through, between 100 and 200 a day. That's a lot of money. And if you think about what we have destroyed in Iran, it can all be replaced with money. We did, I mean, the 100+ girls from the girls' school that we destroyed and then lied about, that can't be replaced with money. But the missiles, those can be reacquired. The nuclear program can be fired up again. Our own intelligence community assesses that Iran has about half of its missiles left. And the supposed regime change that we've forced to happen, if anything, the current regime is more hardline than the last regime, and the entire government has been militarized. The IRGC is firmly in control, and the Iranians haven't even deployed their most powerful weapon, which is that asymmetric advantage that they've demonstrated that they have over us. I mean, the first 6 Americans killed in this war were taken out by a cheap Shahed drone that penetrated every one of our layered defenses and hit a base in Kuwait with no overhead protection. And the arrogance of this Secretary of Defense to dismiss this drone that killed 6 of the people for whom he's responsible, to dismiss it as a squirter after rejecting the help. And this is going to sound like a segue. It's not. After rejecting the offers of help from the Ukrainians for years, who figured out how to take down these drones, who have perfected the art of counter UAS, who have perfected the art of taking down exactly this kind of drone. It's the Shaheds that were raining terror over Ukrainian cities for the past few years. And the Ukrainians are knocking them out of the sky with $1,000 counter drones. Meanwhile, we're launching $1 million interceptors at these things, missing, and then high-fiving ourselves for having destroyed a 50-year plus old Iranian Navy, destroying their Air Force, forgetting the fact that that's never how they were going to project power. And I'll just leave folks with this observation. In the war that we waged against Iraq, how long did Iraq's Navy last? How long did Iraq's Air Force last? 5 minutes. The war went on for another 10 years. We're congratulating ourselves for all the wrong things.
Let me ask you a multi-answer question, if you will, and you don't have to go on and on and on about this because I know you're pressed for time. The first part of the question, in your opinion, how depleted is our arsenal of precision weapons? Forget what the Pentagon says, I refuse to call it Department of War. How depleted are we? And also, realistically, how defenseless is Iran right now after all the bombing that we've done? So are we depleted, and is Iran really defeated or depleted?
No, Iran's certainly not defeated or depleted. The missile that shot down the F-15 was a man-pad, a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. We're not taking all of those things out. We're not even taking a majority of those things out. You can't. You can hide one of those in the trunk of a car. What are we going to do? Blow up every car in Iran? No, Iran has plenty of those things, and they are lethal, as they demonstrated in shooting down that F-15. For our part, I don't know. I don't have an inside track into the weapon stockpiles of the U.S. military, but I do know that the rate at which we are producing them is a fraction of the rate at which we are using them. It's going to take years and years at current production rates to replace our supply of THAADs and standard interceptor missiles. Meanwhile, we have, I guarantee it, near-peer adversaries like China observing everything we're doing and waiting for their next move. Oh, and by the way, this canard that Ukraine somehow soaked up these weapons that we need now in the Gulf, we gave them our old stuff. And they were taking on one of those near-peer adversaries so that we wouldn't have to. Russia represents a threat to the entire region, including now American forces in the Gulf. Russia is providing those coordinates, that intel, to the Iranians so that they can hit American bases. That E-3 AWACS plane that was destroyed in Saudi Arabia, coordinates were almost certainly provided by the Russians. So our support for Ukraine with old weapon systems like the HIMARS, which we were replacing, is the best deal on the planet because we're not risking our own troops. We're using old material to send them, and they are fighting a global fight for for democracy worldwide. Best money we ever spent. And if you hear JD Vance blame that for the shortage of our precision interceptors, that's a total red herring.
Well, I don't have any inside information either on the depletion of our arsenal, but one figure that sticks in my mind is the fact that we have now used about 1,200 Patriot missiles, and that we only produce 600 a year. So, for somebody as stupid as I am, that's 2 years worth of Patriot missiles. And as you know, we have not exactly kept up with our defense base, our factories that produce these things. If anything, we've decimated it. So we don't have the ability to really build up, to produce weapons as we should. So this, if that's true across all of the weapons that we've used, the THAADs and the other interceptors, not just the Patriots, and the launch systems themselves, I think we're in trouble when it comes to things like Taiwan, South Korea, the eastern flank of NATO, and so forth. But of course, we're not going to get the right information from the Pentagon about that. Let me ask you something closer to my home, and something I've written about, and a story actually I'm continuing to work on. And that is something you never get asked, because it's just not part of what's going on other than in certain circles. And that is the security, or the security lapses, as I call it, around our military installations here in CONUS, here in the United States. There's been a rash of incidents recently about bombs being found either in or near military installations in the United States, one of which was just about 3 weeks or so at the main gate of MacDill in Tampa, which, as you know, is the headquarters of CENTCOM and SOCOM. And not only was it the bomb placed there, it wasn't found for 2 weeks. And even though they made a search of this, I did some looking. I actually wrote a story about this 5 years ago, where I was able to go onto the base myself with very little checking at all. At the time, I had 2 Russian nationals with me who were here legally. They didn't ask for their ID. They didn't look in my car. They didn't look under the car. They didn't have bomb-sniffing dogs. They didn't look in the trunk, just nothing. Just look for scan my ID and said, "Have a nice day." We proceeded to roam around the base. We took pictures in front of and against the door of SOCOM headquarters and CENTCOM headquarters. We walked up to the OSI office. We walked right into a hangar, which was not guarded and had nobody there for 3 or 4 hours. So this bomb was just found about 3 weeks ago, and I can't get anybody to talk about it, but there is media working on it now, so I won't get into that. There is a story to come. Do you have any opinions at all, or just thoughts about the fact that during a war where there are probably sleeper cells in the United States from Iran and others, Chinese, it was a Chinese national, by the way, who planted the bomb at MacDill. Do you believe, or what do you think about the security of our installations? If they're anything like the sterling performance of the Secret Service, I worry a lot.
Well, let me give you the nightmare scenario. I think one-off bombs are certainly threatening, and there's something to worry about, and there's no excuse for that kind of lapse. But I was in Ukraine during what the Ukrainians called Operation Spiderweb, which was a masterstroke of Ukrainian ingenuity and bravery and intelligence, in which they pre-positioned trucks with containers on the backs deep inside Russian territory, close to Russian military bases. Some of these pre-positioned trucks were 1,000 kilometers inside Russia. And in a matter of minutes, they deployed probably less than $1 million worth of drones from panels that opened up on these containers. They took off and they struck up to a third of Putin's strategic air fleet, destroyed billions upon billions of dollars worth of, in some cases, irreplaceable strategic air assets with $1 million worth of drones. Incidentally, that operation, those details were never shared with American intelligence, because the Ukrainian intelligence service could not trust our own intelligence community. That's a damning indictment of Tulsi Gabbard and her leadership there. But right now, this morning, There is literally nothing in the US to protect us from exactly that kind of attack from the Chinese or the Iranians. And the drones that the Ukrainians used to launch that attack are not super sophisticated, cost, a few $1,000 each. There is nothing preventing a truck with a bunch of drones hidden in the back from pulling up next to Whiteman Air Force Base, or a container ship pulling into Seattle Harbor or Long Beach or Baltimore and launching a devastating drone attack on American infrastructure. We are totally exposed to that kind of thing. Meanwhile, we're supposed to be comforted by an FBI that is led by Kash Patel, who dismissed all the Iranian experts in the agency. We're supposed to be comforted by an IC led by Tulsi Gabbard, who is more focused on raiding election courthouses, election offices in Fulton County, Georgia, than she is on protecting the homeland. And we've got a, air quotes, Department of Homeland Security that is rounding up grandmothers and moms dropping off kids at daycare in minivans. They just detained the widow of a GI, an 85-year-old plus French woman who married her sweetheart from World War II. I mean, what are we doing? Of course, we should be worried. We are as exposed as a country as the White House Correspondents' Dinner was as a ballroom. The entire country is the Washington Hilton right now.
And I understand why the military or intelligence officials at the senior level refuse to address this on the record. But I'm sorry, the damn American media has fallen down. And it's only because of podcasters like yourself, myself, and, the Midas Network and several others that are actually doing or saying anything about this. We don't have a media anymore. They're a joke. They're not protecting us from anything. And it really just pisses me off. And you're right. I mean, what you just said should not be allowed to happen. But it is happening, and we should not, as Americans, feel secure in our own country, and certainly not our military bases and our sensitive targets. And these are allegedly, Ken, as you know, hardened targets. My God, what about the soft targets, which are all over the place? Don't even want to get into that. We don't have time. Any last thoughts to further darken the skies of people who aren't already depressed about the future of America? Okay, I'll ask you one last question, and I'll let you go. What do you think? What are your thoughts about the 2026 election? Is the GOP, is MAGA actually going to do what they've said they're going to do, which is to interfere, to control the elections by placing DHS people all around the polling places? Or, as I think it was Stalin used to say, it's not how many votes they get, it's who counts the votes. Are they going to have their own people counting the votes? Is the election going to be compromised because of MAGA in November, in your opinion?
Well, this was actually going to be my last reflection, so I'm glad you asked the question. And I think the exact Stalin quote, not in Russian, but he said, "It doesn't matter who votes. It matters who counts the votes and how."
Thank you.
And I think there is a concerted effort underway to determine who is counting the votes and how. But I want to end on an optimistic note, because we still have a very distributed system of elections and election boards and election counting. I don't think the Republicans are going to go for a Republican takeover, a federal takeover of election counting, as has been proposed by the administration. I think that's going to be a Rubicon they refuse to cross. And I think the American people's verdict is going to be rendered in November and then in 2028 in such numbers that it will be impossible this time to rig it, to influence it. It is one thing for the president to call the Secretary of State in Georgia and say, "Find me 11,000 votes." I mean, he did that and proved that it almost worked. It will be another thing altogether to call a Secretary of State and say, "Find me 100,000 votes, find me 1,000,000 votes." So the message I want to leave to listeners, I hope everybody hears this, is that we have to vote in numbers that have never been seen before. We have to drive up the margin so high that any claim of fraud or any attempt to manipulate or a phone call to a Secretary of State from the president asking for to find 11,000 votes, that is immediately dismissed. If the margins are big enough, they can't take it, and so that's on us. That's where we still have power here. This can't just be a Democratic win. It needs to be a Democratic tsunami.
And on that optimistic note, which I actually share with you, I know you're going to have to go. Ken, thanks so much. Ken Harbaugh, thank you so much for being here. I hope you actually get a chance to talk here again soon. And if
Let's
you could
do it.
hang on just for a moment after we go off the air. But to everyone else, as I always tell you folks, please take care, stay safe, and stay sane.